Good morning. My name is Jay Rosenthal, and I'm the Managing Director of Business of Cannabis. Welcome to the Cannabis Daily Show for Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. Since 2017, Business of Cannabis has highlighted the companies, brands, people, and trends driving the cannabis industry. We look to do that here every day. We'd love to hear from you in the comments, and always feel free to visit us at businessofcannabis.com, as well as all of our social channels, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please, as the kids say, smash the subscribe button. Following today's rundown of the top news, we'll connect with Matthew Hutchinson, the Vice President of Logistics at Leaflink, to talk about cannabis supply chain logistics right now. Coming up next week, March 30th, we'll have our retail series presented by Leafly and Vitrina Group, talking about how to prepare your cannabis retail store and dispensary for 420. And then in September, we'll be in New York City again for Business of Cannabis New York for a 2-day bonanza. More information on that below, as well as links to the event page. Now, for today's stories, strap in because it's a big one. 2 huge deals to start your day that actually missed our deadline for yesterday, but Aurora acquired Thrive and Greybeard, their Greybeard brand, and Cresco acquired Columbia Care. We'll get to that in a moment. Cantor Fitzgerald has weighed in on safe banking and how it might happen. Tilray is selling their Nanaimo facility. Former Kronos CEO Mike Gorenstein is returning, and Dr. Reddy's is entering the European market. For our first story. It's never a dull moment, and after hours yesterday, Aurora announced its acquisition of Thrive Cannabis and their Greybeard brand, which is well received both throughout Canada, but also specifically with retailers themselves. It includes a Farmgate store here in Ontario, so kudos to Bubba, Robin, and the whole Thrive crew over there. And in a massive deal in the U.S., the rich are getting richer. Cresco Labs is going to become the new leader in cannabis, as they say, with the acquisition of Columbia Care in a $2 billion deal. More on all of that tomorrow with some analysis as well. For our second story, but not really unrelated to the first one, the only way for safe banking to pass is if Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer allows it to be heard, go through committee, and voted on, according to a memo by Cantor Fitzgerald and shared in a tweet by Business Insider's Jeremy Burke. Quote, "We assume Senator Schumer would want some add-ons to the current safe version in order to get behind it," but the memo continues, "but on the other hand, these add-ons cannot lead to a loss of Republican support." And just to clarify, the nature of those add-ons would be criminal record expungement, social equity provisions, and or research, which really would lose Republican support. So Cantor Fitzgerald painted, I think, a fairly bleak picture of safe banking this year. For our next story. After its merger with Aphria last year, Tilray made its new headquarters in New York City and put its 8-year-old facility in Nanaimo up for sale. Now, that building has sold, putting 170 locals in Nanaimo out of work. There was nothing like it in Canada, quote from Kim Smythe, the Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce president. "We were the first. It was quite a coup at the time." Sorry to the folks in Nanaimo. For our next story, after stepping down as CEO of Ontario-based Kronos in 2020, Mike Gorenstein's back at the helm, reports MJ Biz. Former CEO Kurt Schmidt has now retired. In the last 2 years, Kronos lost an estimated $475 million and announced it's selling off its Pete's Naturals campus, growing facility in Stayner, Ontario. In a statement, Gorenstein said he would focus on, quote, "creating a more agile supply chain, the U.S. cannabis market, rare cannabinoids, and cutting costs and increasing ROI." Sounds like everybody's turnaround plan of every single company over the past 2 years. For our final story, the 4th largest pharmaceutical company in India, Dr. Reddy's, has entered the European cannabis market, this according to Business Can. With President Joe Biden signaling that the U.S. would shift away from pharmaceutical imports, there could be more interest from India's massive pharma sector in the European market. As for Dr. Reddy's, the company's initial focus will be on Germany, which head of medical cannabis Ozan Temazken says presents an opportunity to meet unmet patient needs. Those are the stories we're watching today. Join 10,000 others and catch all of these stories in your inbox and more every day at 7 a.m. Eastern with our Cannabis Daily newsletter. So sign up for that on our website at businessofcannabis.com. Coming up, a BofC live conversation with Matthew Hutchinson. He's the Vice President of Logistics at Leaflink. We connected with him to talk about Leaflink's approach to new markets, including New York, how the logistics services they provide have grown alongside the industry, and how specialization is happening throughout the supply chain and the sector right now. Matt, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jay. Really excited to chat today.
I'm excited to chat too. And you are the VP of Logistics at Leaflink. And I just imagine in front of you is like 700 screens with like who's ordering what, where the product is
Yeah.
going, trucks, like, are you, is it
You're
like,
not off base. It's pretty
okay, good.
close. It's pretty close. We've got a number of we've got maps running around with the trucks in the 5 states we're operating in today, where we're seeing where everything is, watching on time rates, making sure things are getting delivered, making sure that what we're picking up is and dropping off is all accurate, and then making sure that we're filling orders on time. So definitely have all those dashboards and are constantly looking at that stuff. You're
It's
not
like,
too far off.
it's like cannabis traffic control.
That's right. That's right. A little air traffic, watching all the different people moving around, making sure that everything's getting there on time.
I like that. That sounds awesome. I once
Yeah,
worked
yeah.
I once worked for a garbage company. They had similar things with their trucks, and that was like every day, but it was a lot earlier than I imagined your trucks. Well, your truck's probably on early, but
Well,
it was
you'd
like,
be surprised. You'd be
uh,
surprised. It also depends on where you're sitting in the country, right?
right.
We've
That's
got
right.
operations. Yeah, we've got operations across, the entire country from Massachusetts all the way to California, and so we got different people waking up at different times, getting trucks on the road pretty early. So, no, it's definitely an interesting kind of run across the different markets there.
Yeah, and it must be interesting. And obviously, and you guys share a lot, sort of like, are there trends that, well, you have access to that we don't, but that are like maybe unique, maybe post-pandemic or during pandemic that have happened that either weren't happening before or happening at a different clip now?
Yeah, I think, I don't know that I would entirely attribute it to the pandemic in general, but I think what we're seeing is a realm of kind of specialization start to occur in a lot of places where people realize what they're really good at and defining what their strategies are, and then kind of looking for other people to help take some of the pain off their plate, right? And so what we've seen is, logistics is not something that when you signed up to be a cannabis company and operate in this space and really grow your business, a lot of people focused on, well, I want to make great products. I want to build amazing brands. I want to create amazing consumer experience. Nobody was like, I want to move packages across the state and deal with blizzards and wildfires in different parts of California and Colorado, right? Nobody thought about those things, or if they did, they're forward thinking. And so what we're finding is that those people who had previously set up their own shops, their own way of moving those things, are starting to move away from that and really focus on the areas that they're really good. So whether that be, co-packing, manufacturing, whether that be building amazing brands and outsourcing some of those different elements, whether that's focusing on the retail side and rolling up shops and growing those businesses to create a brand from the consumer perspective, with the retail shops. We're seeing more and more people move away from having to deal with a lot of the pain of the back office stuff that they didn't really anticipate. And so that's really led to some really interesting opportunities for Leaflink to continue to kind of mature in the space where, whereas a lot of people know us as the marketplace, which is a huge part of who we are and what we do. But as we've continued to look across the space, solving additional supply chain problems has become a real driver for what we're trying to bring to the industry, which is where the logistics and the payment sides of the business really come in.
Yeah, and it is interesting because uh, for the better, I think, for the industry, it's starting to look like other sectors, right? Like
Right, right.
there are breweries, of course, like thinking about beer, there are breweries, of course, that
Yeah,
distribute their own thing within a very tight radius,
that's
but
right.
many more go to centralized distribution hubs to like,
Hmm.
whoever's distributing Budweiser is now distributing, 400 other types of beer and beverages as well because someone else does it better than you do. And you're good at growing cannabis, you're good at packaging, good at brand building, all that, but it's really hard to be great at that and be great at sort of watching
That's
trucks,
right.
frankly, all over the
It,
country, all hours.
that's right. They're two different things, right? They're two very different businesses, and they're two very complex sides to both of those elements. And I think what we're also seeing is the need to have more control of your actual supply chain, especially as a retailer, right? And so whereas traditional alcohol and traditional cannabis even, we're focused on retailers, or excuse me, where distributors moving product around, dropping product off. There's so many brands in the cannabis space today, in such a wide variety of forms, for consumption, that the SKU count is, pretty large for a lot of these retailers. And being able to actually control that inventory, making sure that inventory is staying on the shelf, is becoming a bigger and bigger component to a successful retailer. And so we're starting to see kind of this idea of moving to a centralized distro on the retail side rather than just on the brand side, where a retail chain will order 30, 40, 45, 60 days of inventory, hold that inventory in their hub, and then leveraging tools that we're able to provide to them, pull that inventory down and just get 2 deliveries a week, restocking their entire flow, eliminating any of those stockouts that continue to kind of plague a lot of the different retailers in the space, and then also leveraging that to free up their working capital, leveraging some of the payments aspects of the business.
Yeah. And it's a bit also maturing on the retailer side too, whether they're, mom and pop or more than one store, is that everybody's growing up, right? Like
That's right.
It's
They have
both
to,
on
right?
the brand and product side, but also on the retail side. And you realize that, cannabis is of course unique in its product and it's, worth to society, but the logistics of a supply chain are incredibly complicated, and only people like you, Matt, got into it to actually do that work.
Well, yeah, and it's certainly interesting to see kind of that maturity starting to take hold, right? Whether that's working through Leaflink or on their own, you're starting to see people really dial in their supply chains, thinking about things like supply contracts, thinking about things like what are the right manufacturing runs? How do I free up my cash flow so that I'm actually able to support the business in other ways? And I think it's really a good thing, because as these companies become more mature along those lines, it's going to create a better experience for the consumer ultimately, as people dial in their supply chains.
Yeah. And Matt, one of the really exciting things that sort of we're watching and we've sort of not been a part of, but helping present, is sort of what's happening in New York, sort of Leaflink's sort of home
Yeah,
base or
yeah,
headquarters. And it is a market that is exciting for, I mean, any number of reasons. One, it's huge. So just relative size is important. Sort of central location in the Northeast, leading culture on so many different levels. It's where the capital,
totally.
like all those things. And like they happen to be or seem to be or trying to do social equity in cannabis in a really interesting way. Like, how does that look to you guys as you look at new markets and accordingly in your backyard? Like,
Yeah.
how does that work for Leaflink as you sort of approach the next step in New York?
Yeah, New York is certainly an exciting market for Leaflink, given that it is, we're headquartered in New York, we're based, downtown Manhattan, and a really exciting time for us. I think when we look at it, the social equity piece is really what stands out to us, because as we look at least how we look at ourselves internally, we see ourselves focusing on transparent markets that allow for equitable competition. And that's really the foundation of a marketplace at its core. And as we're building out our supply chain platform, being able to provide services that enable what appears to be really the template for social equity, both on the retail and on the manufacturing side, and a lot of the things that they're doing, talking about setting up specific funds for businesses. We're really excited about it. I think we're able to we've been able to work alongside some of the regulators there to kind of help show kind of what we've seen work well in certain markets and not work well in other markets. And I think a lot of people have been focused on trying to do right on the social equity side. And it feels like, and it's still early days, a lot to be seen, but it feels like New York is doing a lot to move those things in the right direction. I think the one area that we're super mindful of is access to capital for a lot of these social equity license holders. And so, Leaflink has been spending a ton of time, talking to both the state as well as potential participants in the industry to figure out what is it that we can do, leveraging our kind of scale to actually enable a lot of these operators to become successful and get stood up and and be able to compete in what what appears to be a really exciting market.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question that I hadn't planned on asking until you started talking about it, but
Sure.
and that is in your free time, which there is very little, I'm sure, based on sort of when we're talking and sort of
Yeah.
what's on your plate and knowing the screens or thinking about the screens you're watching, like, do you think about things like, oh my goodness, if there was interstate commerce, how would we operate that from a Leaflink perspective and moving product across state lines? Like, do you think about that and where like the
Yeah.
distribution hubs, like, are you thinking like Amazon style distribution hubs and central locations off like the New Jersey Thruway or whatever?
Yeah. So we're definitely are thinking about interstate commerce. Like we think that there's still probably a little bit of runway before we get to that point. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about it. I don't know that I would compare it to an Amazon network, if you will, or Amazon owned network. Like we don't own trucks, we don't own licenses. We work with local market operators to connect them and utilize our technology to make sure that they are moving things effectively and that our customers have an amazing delivery experience in using the platform. But we are certainly thinking about when we are partnering with operators, where are they located? Where are the major terminals and the major hubs going to be in the country? That means that at some point there's going to be supply states and demand states. And I think as you look at the West Coast, and without getting too deep into some of the trends you saw potentially during Q4 on some of the flower price compression, I think that is a clear sign that there's a saturation of supply in those markets. And so how do you think about how you could actually leverage the world-class cultivation that's happening in those areas and pair that with some of the demand that's happening in other areas where it maybe is not as cost effective to actually grow certain types of supply, whether that's biomass for processing or whether that's outdoor flower. Like there's so many different ways to start to think about that and what could happen once you have interstate commerce to enable and open those things up. And so we're certainly thinking about, all right, how do we position ourselves long term to when it's ready to connect those two parts of the country, whether that's through being close to rail lines, whether that's through being close to major hubs. Those are all kind of part of how we're trying to position ourselves.
You're gonna need more screens, lots more screens.
I think so. Or better eyes.
It's gonna look like
Screens.
NASA.
Yeah.
It's gonna look like
Yeah.
either NASA or like a big trading desk. It's gonna be
Yeah.
great.
It's I think though, while that's a really exciting opportunity that's in front of us, I think where our head is really focused right now is supporting a lot of the local market operators and making sure that they're operating to the best of their ability and that they're able to focus on what they really came into the industry for, as I was kind of talking about a minute ago. And these things will eventually come, but I think one of the challenges about this industry, and I'm sure you've seen this in a lot of your conversations, is there's so much opportunity. And to make sure that you're focusing on the right things and doing those things really, really well, that's where we're trying to dial in. And so while these things like interstate commerce are out there, they're things that we talk about, but we're not necessarily optimizing for at the moment.
Right. Well, Matt, this is great. I really enjoy sort of getting the latest and greatest from what's happening at Leaflink. Love talking about New York. Love thinking big picture about what the rest of the world might look like if DC ever gets off. I don't know, off the couch. I don't even know where DC is, just sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah.
But it also is obviously crucially important to support the operators already in market and doing great work. So I appreciate the time. Look forward to connecting with you down the road.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
That was episode 53 of the Cannabis Daily Show. Thank you for joining us here. If you did on YouTube, please do subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.